My name is Bobby, and the thing my family never understood about me is that I can stay quiet for a long time without being weak. I can sit at a holiday table with perfect candles and silver holders and spotless crystal glasses and the smell of roasted meat filling the room, and I can smile through the small cuts like they're nothing. I can let my father perform his yearly toast like it's entertainment, and I can let my sister grin like she's hosting the whole world out of the goodness of her heart. I can do that, and I have done that for years, because it was easier to let them think I didn't care than to watch them enjoy the reaction they wanted from me. That night, the table looked flawless in the way my mother prided herself on, the kind of picture perfect setting she would later post online with a caption about traditions and gratitude, as if gratitude wasn't something she only expected from other people. My sister sat at the head of the table like she owned the place, telling another long story about her latest business deal and how she was already planning the next one. She talked with that smooth confidence that made strangers believe she was the kind of person who never needed help, the kind of person who always landed on her feet. I didn't bother pointing out that the down payment for her first deal had come from me, wired into her account when she'd sworn she would lose everything if she didn't get it. I didn't remind anyone that the reason she could sit there so comfortable and so smug was because I had been quietly holding the whole setup together behind the scenes. They all loved to call this place the family getaway, the vacation home, the holiday house, as if it had floated into existence because of family love. But it wasn't love that bought it. It was me. I bought the house. I maintained it. I paid the taxes on it. I handled every bill without fanfare, every repair without a group text, every utility cost without a single thank you. Somewhere along the way, my sister decided it was hers. She acted like she was the rightful owner, like we were all coming to her house for the holidays, as if she was the one graciously hosting us. She used the address on everything from bank documents to party invitations. She hosted her friends there and presented it as her property. She hinted she might renovate the kitchen, as if the kitchen belonged to her imagination. She never paid a cent for utilities, repairs, taxes, or upkeep. And every holiday, the pattern repeated itself, from little digs from my father, a smirk from my sister, and my mother pretending not to hear. When the main course was served, my father picked up his glass. He always made a toast, but his toasts weren't warm or sentimental. They were performances, and I had been his favorite target for years. He raised his glass with that smirk he always wore when he thought he was about to land a hit. "To the one who can't seem to get their life together," he said. And the familiar chuckles went around the table, the same rehearsed amusement I'd heard countless times. Before the sound even faded, my sister leaned in with a grin, eyes bright, like she was adding the punchline to a joke she'd been telling her whole life. "But at least she makes us feel financially better about ourselves," she said. The laughter that followed was almost reflexive for them, the kind of laughter people do when they want to stay on the right side of whoever holds power in the room. My mother didn't laugh, not exactly, but she didn't stop it either. She just stared at her plate like silence could pass as innocence. Normally I would have played along because that was the role. The quiet one, the one who absorbs it, the one who keeps everything running while being treated like the family punchline. But something in me had shifted over the past year. I had been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of quietly pulling away, and a lot of preparing for the day when I wouldn't just sit there and take it. I took a sip from my glass, stood up slowly, and waited until I had their full attention. My voice was calm, almost casual, the way it gets when you're no longer bargaining with the outcome. "To the one," I said, "who just sold the vacation home you've been living in, rent-free." The clinking stopped. It was like I dropped a glass on the floor, and every shard of it was hanging in the air. My father's smirk vanished so fast it looked like someone had wiped it off his face. My sister's mouth hung open, the grin collapsing into shock. My mother froze with her fork still in her hand, eyes wide like she had just heard something that could not be undone. I sat down without another word. No explanation, no follow-up, just silence. It stretched across the table like a heavy fog, pressing in on all of them. Finally, my mother muttered, "You didn't." Her voice was low, but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. I didn't answer, because answering would have made it a conversation. And I wasn't there to negotiate. I had. And they would find out soon enough just how much else I was done putting up with. By the time that night ended, it wasn't just another family dinner. It was the drop that finally spilled over. For my sister, it would be the beginning of the end, though she didn't realize it yet. And for me, it was the first time in years I felt something that wasn't anger or resentment or exhaustion. It was control. Quiet, deliberate, irreversible control. The morning after that dinner, the house was quiet, and for once, so was my phone. No texts, no calls, not even the usual "great night with the family" group message my sister liked to send after every holiday gathering, the one where she would post some overly polished photo of the table with a caption about cherishing traditions, pretending it was all hers to cherish. This time, there was nothing. I made coffee and went about my morning without thinking much about it. If anything, the silence was almost refreshing. I didn't need to hear them trying to reframe what happened, or worse, pretending it hadn't. Still, I knew them well enough to understand it wasn't over. They were all processing, and my sister, more than anyone, was going to feel the ground shift beneath her feet. She didn't do well with uncertainty. She didn't do well with not being the person steering the story. And I had just ripped the steering wheel out of her hands. By mid-afternoon, the quiet cracked. My phone lit up with her name. I watched it ring until it stopped. A few minutes later, my father's name appeared. Then my mother's. Both went to voicemail. They weren't calling to check in. They were calling to get answers, to see if I could be swayed, to find the lever they always used when they needed me back in my place. What they didn't know yet was that the sale wasn't a threat. It was done. The vacation home had been listed quietly, shown discreetly, and signed over weeks ago. The deposit was sitting in my account. I told no one, because I didn't want the drama until there was nothing left for them to stop. I'd learned the hard way that if you warn people like my family, they don't prepare, they sabotage. They don't ask questions, they start campaigns. They don't accept boundaries, they look for loopholes. For my sister, this wasn't just losing a place to spend the holidays. She'd been living there nearly full-time for 3 years, using the address on everything from bank documents to party invitations. She'd hosted her friends there. She'd talked about her place, like she'd earned it. She'd even hinted at renovations, like she could change the kitchen because it was part of her brand. Meanwhile, every single bill passed through my hands. Utilities, repairs, taxes, upkeep. I handled it all without fanfare, because part of me still wanted to believe I was being generous, that I was helping, that someday it would be appreciated instead of exploited. Around 6 in the evening, I heard the knock on my apartment door. It wasn't soft or hesitant. It was sharp, almost impatient, the kind of knock that already assumes it will be answered. I opened the door and found my sister standing there, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look like someone in control. No perfectly styled hair, no makeup. She wore an oversized sweatshirt like she'd thrown it on in a hurry. Her eyes were wide and her breathing was just a little too fast, the way it gets when someone is trying to hold a panic attack back with pure willpower. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She stepped inside like she owned my apartment too, like the concept of asking permission had never applied to her when it came to me. "You can't just sell it," she said, voice tight and clipped. I shut the door behind her and leaned against it, watching her pace across my living room like a trapped animal. She asked if I was joking. She asked if there was still time to call it off. She asked if I understood what this meant for her, and she said it like I was supposed to be devastated by the fact that it meant something for her. The words spilled out fast, almost tripping over each other, and I let her go on without interrupting once. I'd learned that when you stop feeding someone's panic with reassurance, their true motives start to show. Finally, she stopped and stared at me like she was waiting for my face to soften. When it didn't, her voice dropped. "Bobby," she said, trying to sound reasonable, This is insane. You're overreacting. It was one joke." I held her gaze. "It wasn't one joke," I said. "It was years." Her eyes flicked away, scanning the room like she could find a better argument on my shelves. "Okay," she said quickly, "but even if you're mad, you can't punish me like this. I live there. My stuff is there. My mail goes there. My friends know that's my house." "That's the problem," I replied, calm enough that it made her blink. "It was never your house. It was mine." Her face lost color. She sat down on the edge of my couch like she'd just realized she was in a place she couldn't control. She tried to force a laugh, but the sound came out thin. "You're serious," she whispered. "I've been serious," I said. "For years. You just didn't notice because you didn't have to." She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "But I thought, we're family. You weren't using it full time. I was taking care of it, keeping it alive, hosting, making it what it is. You didn't take care of it, I said. You took advantage of it. Her eyes snapped back to mine, anger flaring. That's not fair, she said. I've had stress. I've been building my life. You know how hard things have been. I do, I answered. Because every time things got hard, you called me, and I wired money. Twice I pulled you out of a financial mess you swore would ruin you. I never asked for credit. I never asked for applause. But I also didn't sign up to be ridiculed at a holiday table while you live in a house I pay for. Her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment she looked smaller, not because she was suddenly humble, but because the story she'd been living in was collapsing. The thought of losing the house wasn't just losing a roof, it was losing the image she'd built. Without that address, without that backdrop, she would have to start explaining. She would have to admit she wasn't the self-made success she claimed to be. She would have to face questions she couldn't deflect with charm. When she finally stood up, she didn't slam the door. She didn't throw a parting insult. She didn't even look at me the way she used to, like I was beneath her. She just walked out with her head down, bag over her shoulder, moving quickly like she didn't want anyone to see her. I knew exactly where she was going, straight to our parents. And when they came, because they wouldn't be coming to talk. They'd be coming to restore the old balance. I stood in my quiet apartment after she left, listening to the silence settle back in. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt prepared, because the sale was done, and now the only thing left was watching them figure out what to do when the person they used to control stopped cooperating. They didn't even wait 48 hours. The knock came the next evening, just after the streetlights outside flickered on, that soft hum filling the space between day and night. It wasn't tentative or casual. It was heavy, deliberate, the kind of knock that says, "We're here to settle something." I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. My body recognized the sound before my mind caught up. When I opened the door, both of my parents were standing there. My father's shoulders were stiff, his jaw set tight like he'd been practicing this conversation in his head. My mother clutched her purse with both hands, as if it were some kind of anchor, something to keep her steady if things went sideways. They stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, carrying that familiar energy of people who believe they still have authority just because they've always had it. I closed the door behind them and didn't offer drinks. That alone felt like a statement. My father took the armchair, settling into it like a judge claiming the bench. My mother perched on the edge of the couch, ready to spring up if she needed to smooth things over or shut something down. The room felt smaller with them in it, like the walls remembered old arguments and were bracing themselves. He didn't bother with small talk. "Your sister's in shock," he said, "and frankly, so are we. This thing with the house, it's drastic." His tone had that clipped edge he used when he thought he was being reasonable, when he believed his words carried the weight of logic simply because they were his. I stood across from him, arms crossed loosely, not defensive, just grounded. "It's not drastic," I said. "It's overdue." My mother inhaled sharply, like she wanted to interrupt, but my father pushed on. "That house became part of the family," he said. "You don't just pull something like that out from under people without talking it through." I met his eyes. "When's the last time either of you paid for a repair?" I asked. "Or a single month of utilities? Or property taxes? When's the last time you contributed anything at all to that house besides opinions?" My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked down at her purse like the answer might be written on the leather. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. My father shifted in his seat, his foot tapping against the rug. "Family sticks together," he said finally. "Sometimes you help each other out. That's just how it works." "No," I replied. "Family doesn't mean being the permanent safety net while being mocked for supposedly not having your life together. Family doesn't mean silently footing the bill for years, so someone else can live like a host in a house they never bought, only to humiliate you at your own dinner table." The words hung there, heavier than I expected. My mother's expression softened, not with defensiveness, but with something closer to uncertainty. "Maybe," she said carefully, "maybe things were misunderstood. Maybe we didn't always show enough appreciation." She used the word maybe like it could smooth the edges, like it could turn years of behavior into a miscommunication. I didn't let it pass. "There is no maybe about it," I said. "You took me for granted, not once, not accidentally, as a pattern." They didn't deny it. That was the part that surprised me most. There were no excuses, No attempts to rewrite history, no sudden claims that they had done more than I remembered. They just sat there, absorbing the truth like it had finally caught up to them and there was nowhere left to run. When they finally stood to leave, my father was the first out the door. He didn't look back. My mother lingered for a moment, turning toward me with an expression I hadn't seen before. It wasn't disappointment or expectation. It was something closer to recalibration, like she was seeing me not as the child who would always cover the gaps, but as someone who had stepped out of that role entirely. She didn't ask me to undo the sale. She didn't try to guilt me. She just nodded once, faintly, and followed my father into the hallway. I stood in the doorway for a moment after closing the door, listening to their footsteps fade. The quiet that settled afterward felt different than before. It wasn't fragile. It wasn't waiting to be broken. It felt earned. For the first time in years, I wasn't on the defensive. The power dynamic had shifted, and they all felt it. But I also knew my sister wasn't going to absorb this loss in silence. She had an ego that couldn't stand public cracks, and losing that house was going to leave one big enough for the whole family to see. She wouldn't come at me directly, not at first. She'd start working through the people she thought she could turn, and I was ready for that too. By the third day after the dinner, I knew my sister had gone into full damage control mode. She wasn't calling me. She was calling everyone else. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months had suddenly reached out, messages opening with careful concern, the kind that pretends to be neutral but is really fishing for information. Some asked how I was doing. Others asked if everything was okay with the family. A few went straight to the point and asked what had really happened with the house. They all had the same tone, cautious and tentative, like they were afraid they'd step on a landmine if they phrased things wrong. It didn't take long to understand why. In her version of events, I had blindsided her. I had sold the family home right out from under her, the same home she claimed she had helped build into what it was. She painted herself as practically homeless, a victim of my cold, impulsive decision. She left out every important fact: that the house was mine, that I bought it, paid for it, and maintained it alone, that she had lived there rent-free for years while using it to elevate her image. At first, I let it go. I figured the people who mattered would see through it. I didn't feel the need to defend myself against a story that couldn't hold up under even mild scrutiny. But then the calls got stranger. My realtor called to say my sister had shown up unannounced at one of his other property showings, cornering him in front of potential buyers. She demanded to know who had purchased the vacation home, and hinted she was considering legal action. He sounded uncomfortable, even recounting it, like he couldn't quite believe someone would behave that way so publicly. It was absurd. She had no legal ground at all, but it showed me something important. She was willing to pull outsiders into this. She wasn't just venting, she was escalating. That night, there was another knock on my door. Standing there was one of my sister's closest friends, a woman I'd only met twice in passing. She asked if she could talk, said she wanted to hear my side before taking anyone's word for it. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She didn't waste time. She told me she'd been staying at the vacation home on and off for the past few months, and my sister had told her she owned it completely. No mention of me, no mention of shared anything, just ownership, full and unquestioned. The friend looked embarrassed as she said it, angry even, like she'd just realized she'd been complicit in a lie. I didn't give her every detail. I didn't need to. I told her the truth plainly, and I let the silence do the rest. When she left, she paused at the door and said something that stuck with me. She's going to burn herself down if she keeps pushing this. By the weekend, cracks were already forming in my sister's story. A cousin called to tell me they'd overheard her on the phone, yelling about people switching sides. Apparently, that friend had confronted her, and instead of backing down, my sister doubled down. She claimed I was lying to make her look bad. She said I was jealous of her life. It was easier for her to believe that than to face the truth. Then came the move I didn't see coming. The buyer of the vacation home reached out through my realtor. He said my sister had tracked down his office and shown up in person, without an appointment, demanding he undo the deal because it was a family matter. According to him, she got loud enough that security had to escort her out. He wasn't angry with me. If anything, he sounded understanding. But he made one thing clear. If she approached him again, he would file a harassment report. That's when it hit me. She was unraveling faster than I thought, and people were starting to notice. Not just friends or family, but outsiders, strangers, people with no emotional attachment to her story. She was crossing lines that couldn't be walked back. I didn't plan on stopping her. Sometimes the best way to win is to let someone dig their own hole. She thrives on reaction, on keeping things alive, long past their expiration date. I had expected her to drag this out for weeks. The fact that she was burning through credibility so quickly caught even me off guard. It started with a message from my cousin. "You need to see what your sister just posted." Attached was a screenshot from a community bulletin board in the small town where the vacation home was located. My sister had written a full-length rant accusing the buyer of stealing her property. She claimed she had been tricked out of her rightful inheritance by a family member with no loyalty. She didn't write my name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who she meant. She went further. She attached photos of herself around the property, lounging on the porch with a coffee cup, posing with friends in the kitchen, sitting on the dock in summer. She framed them as proof of ownership, which was laughable, but also dangerous. The post included the buyer's full name, the address of the house, and even the name of his business. I read it twice, feeling the shift in my chest. This wasn't just a family meltdown anymore. She was dragging an innocent third party into her mess. The buyer called me that afternoon. His voice was calm, but I could hear the irritation underneath. He told me clients were calling him all day asking what was going on, that she was making him look like a criminal. He paused, then said if she kept this up, he'd have his lawyer file for a restraining order, and if it came to court, he'd need me to testify. I told him I understood, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I made a decision I hadn't wanted to make before. I called my parents and pulled them directly into the fire. When I called my parents, I didn't soften anything. I didn't summarize. I didn't protect her. I told them exactly what my sister had posted, where she had posted it, and what she had included. The buyer's name, his business, the address of the house. I told them he was preparing legal action and that if it went that far, I would testify. Not against family, but for the truth. There was silence on the line, the kind that tells you people are finally seeing the full picture and realizing there's no way to spin it anymore. My father was the first to speak. "We'll talk to her," he said. But his voice didn't carry the authority it used to. It sounded tired, unsure, like someone who already knew the conversation wouldn't end the way he hoped. That night, my mother called me back. Her voice had none of its usual edge. She told me they'd confronted my sister, and it had gone exactly the way I expected. She exploded, accused them of siding with me, accused them of betrayal, stormed out before they could say anything that might land. Then my mother said something I'd never heard from her before. "I think you were right," she said quietly. "This was never just about the house." The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from my sister. No screaming, no accusations, just a flat, tired voice saying, "I need to talk to you alone." She didn't say why, but I knew she'd felt the shift. She'd realized every move she made from here on could be used against her. Not just by me, but by someone outside the family with real leverage. I didn't call her back. 3 days later, she showed up at my door. This time, there was no sharp knock, no impatience in her posture. She stood half-shadowed behind the frosted glass, waiting. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten countless quiet breakfasts alone. She kept her hands clasped, eyes drifting around the room, but never really meeting mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. It wasn't awkward silence. It was the kind that fills the space when both people know the power dynamic has shifted and there's no pretending otherwise. When she finally spoke, her words came slowly. She didn't apologize. Not really. She said things had gotten out of hand. She said the post was written in anger. She said she'd deleted it. She said she never meant to cause trouble for the buyer. She said she'd been under a lot of stress. Each sentence was an explanation that carefully avoided accountability. I let her finish. Then I told her what was going to happen next. There would be no more unspoken financial favors. No more borrowing that was really taking. No more living in anything I owned. If she wanted something, she would pay for it herself. If she pulled me into public drama again, I would cut contact entirely. No second chances, no negotiations. She didn't argue, she didn't joke, she didn't twist it around. She just nodded once, eyes fixed on the table, like she couldn't stand to look at me while agreeing. When she left, I closed the door and thought, that's it. It's done. I was wrong. A week later, the buyer called me unexpectedly. I braced myself, assuming there was another problem, but instead he thanked me for keeping things from spiraling further. Then he mentioned something that made me almost laugh out loud. My sister had contacted him again, not to harass him this time, but to ask if he'd consider selling the property to her once she got the funds together. She offered to pay full market value, as if money was the only obstacle between her and rewriting history. The irony was, she didn't have anywhere near what she'd need. She'd have to find investors, take out loans, or ask our parents for help. I could already imagine the conversations, the mental gymnastics she'd use to frame herself as the rightful owner, fighting to reclaim what was hers. That's when it hit me. She hadn't learned the lesson. She wasn't moving forward. She was still looking backward, still convinced that if she pushed hard enough, she could undo what I'd done. But for the first time, that wasn't my problem. I had stepped out of the role they'd kept me in for years, and I wasn't stepping back in. Stop. Part 6. Trespass, Truth, and the Quiet that followed. 2 weeks of silence passed. No texts, no calls, no group messages. At first it felt strange, like the pause before another round. But as the days went on, the silence started to feel real. Then on a gray Thursday morning, my phone rang. It was the buyer again. His first words told me everything had shifted. I think you'll want to hear about this. The night before, my sister had been spotted back in the town where the vacation home was. She didn't call. She didn't knock. She went straight onto the property after dark. She tried the back door first, fumbling with something in her hand. When it didn't open, she circled the house, peering through windows, testing the shed. Neighbors recognized her instantly. When they saw someone circling the property, they didn't hesitate. One of them called the police. Another neighbor's security camera caught the entire thing. By the time officers arrived, she was gone, but she wasn't invisible. Her car was seen leaving the street, and the footage was clear enough that there was no doubt it was her. The buyer filed a formal trespass notice that morning, and in the process, the police contacted my parents to verify her information. There was no way to spin it, no misunderstanding to hide behind. The timeline was exact. The evidence was recorded. That night, my father called me. His voice sounded older than I'd ever heard it. "She's done," he said. "This isn't something we can cover for." No lecture, no guilt, no talk about family unity, just resignation. The next morning, my sister texted me 3 words: "You ruined me." I read it twice, then set the phone down without responding. I hadn't ruined her. She'd done that herself, step by step, convinced she could twist every situation to her advantage. All I'd done was stop playing the part she wrote for me. A week later, the buyer filed for a restraining order. I wasn't needed in court. The police report, neighbor statements, and video footage were enough. The order went through when she didn't even show up. It's been a month now. My parents haven't tried to mediate. My father stopped covering for her. My mother has been quieter than I've ever known her to be. My sister has been couch hopping, telling people she's starting fresh in another city. I don't know if that's true. I don't care enough to find out. The buyer called me one last time, not about her, but to thank me. "It's rare someone cuts ties before the chaos destroys them," he said. "Most people keep paying for it. Now my life is quiet. Not the kind of quiet that waits for the next blow, the kind that gives you space to breathe." I didn't just sell a house. I sold the last piece of ground she could stand on while talking down to me. I closed the door on years of being the safety net, the silent provider, the family joke. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like winning.